Hello, everyone. I am here today with Ryan Holiday. Ryan is a media strategist for clients like Tucker Max, Dove Charney, and after dropping out of college at 19 to apprentice under the strategist Robert Greene, he went on to advise many best-selling authors and multi-platinum musicians. He's the director of marketing at American Apparel, and his first book, Trust Me Online, Confessions of a Media Manipulator, was a Wall Street Journal bestseller. Plus, he's also the author of Growth Hacker Marketing, a primer on the future of PR, marketing, and advertising. Ryan, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So I wanted to start with, there's a quote by Nassim Taleb that I really like. It says, if you don't say in public what you would say in private about public matters, then you're either not free, a fraud, or both. And,
Sure.
and the reason I've been reading your work for years, and we've talked before, and the reason I wanted to talk with you is because I consider you a free man. You never had a problem of saying, you never had a problem of saying what you think, and also not only saying what you think, even if it's politically incorrect, but also you've been very honest about the lessons, the hard lessons of life, the things that you've been wrong about before,
Sure.
the how your mistakes put you to where you're here, where you're now, right?
Sure.
And this is sort of like that kind of freedom and self-awareness is kind of like what we're trying to promote in Exosphere. So this is what I wanted to talk to you, because I think you can enlighten people on how to think for themselves, question commonly held beliefs, and kind of like how sticking to old models of thinking or doing things may limit their freedom. So for example, I saw a parallel in both your books, in both Trust Me Online and Growth Hacker Marketing. There's a parallel of you saying the way I used to do press and the way I used to do marketing
Right.
changed, and now I had to, kind of, adapt to that. So maybe a place to start would be tell a bit about what was your process of dealing with those changes, dealing with those industries, and that growth that came with it.
Yeah, well, first off, I really like that quote. It's one I've always sort of remembered. And there's like a shorter version where he just says, if you see fraud and you don't say fraud, you are a fraud. And I've always sort of believed that and thought about it. But what's interesting is when you write something that people interpret as being like an expose or a change of heart, a lot of people, they wrongly assume that it was like some morning you just woke up and everything was different and you like suddenly realized it. And that's not how it goes. Like there's no magical epiphanies. It's usually a slow process. Like if you read Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions, he talks about like when we make major breakthroughs in science, it's a slow process of noticing more and more assumptions that you held to be true no longer matching with the data that you're seeing on a day-to-day basis. So
That's
I would
what
say
Taleb calls tinkering, right?
right. Right. And I think in my books, or what I try to do in my writing is, you see the world a certain way and you think certain things are true. But if I would say the problem with a lot of writers is all they do is write. So you're not actually testing or checking your assumptions against any real world experience. So like if you're writing about marketing and your job is to write about marketing and speak about marketing, you're not actually like doing any marketing outside of working on your own products. But so for me, it's like I talk about these things in theory and then, I eat lunch and then I go back to my office and I'm working with actual clients. So if the theory is not matching up with what I'm talking about with my clients, I have no reason or no incentive to continue selling bogus theory, right? If all you have is theory and it's working for you, you don't have that same incentive alignment. And so that's why when he talks about people not being free, there's another great line from Upton Sinclair where he says like, it's very hard to get a man to understand something if his salary depends on him not understanding it. And so if you do a certain thing every day and that's what you get paid to do, it's hard for you to see that there's a problem with what you're doing. And it's much more difficult, even if you do see that problem, to talk about it or give it away. Like with my first book, when I sort of exposed this set of skills or tactics that I'd learned that got lots of publicity and press, and could, essentially manipulate the media, it was like lighting hundreds of thousands of dollars on fire, right? Like, because I could have continued to sell those services to people. Now, I mean, it worked out because I sold a book and it did well, but the point is, like, you see a lot of entrenched people who have built up lives around certain assumptions, and it makes it much harder for them to question or change or contradict those assumptions, because it's not just being right or not being right anymore. It's their whole lifestyle and their identity that are dependent on pretending that that assumption is still true.
Right. So is it, it makes me think of all the people that have, jobs they hate, or to go to college and they hate it and whatever. And it's not all, they have to understand that to make that change, it comes with a loss, with a short-term loss. They have to give up something. And that giving up that, when it's part of your identity or it's part of this sort of comfort, it's hard.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be hard. Like there's a good essay from Paul Graham where he talks about keeping your identity small. And the smaller your identity is, and the smaller the story that you've told yourself about what you're doing and why you're doing it, the easier it is to change based on factors and incentives. And like if you're seeing a company, like I talk about this in Growth Hacker Marketing, you're seeing Instagram launch as one company, it flop, and then become a totally different company and then succeed. And you see that in all sorts of startups. If they had, the more wrapped up they'd been in the first version, the harder it would have been to make those decisions to become a different version. And I think there's lessons in that, not just in business, but in our own lives. If you believe a certain thing, like politically or socially, and you're on Facebook every day pounding out about how strongly you feel about this and making a big fucking scene about it, when the evidence changes or when your opinion changes, that's going to be a harder pill for you to swallow. And one, there's no reason to do that for yourself. And two, it has the potential to put you in a lot of uncomfortable positions where you have to continue to publicly believe something that you no longer believe to be true. Like one of my clients was a minister. I did his book earlier this year. He was a minister for like 30 years, and then he realized he was an atheist. And it's like, you can only imagine how difficult that transformation would be. And it's like, because he's not just like, hey, I believe in God, but he worked at a church. His whole life was built around this thing. And then when that assumption was no longer true, he lost everything just changing this one belief. And so I think the less you do that to yourself, the more flexible you can be.
What do you think he gained from it? Like, what does he say he gained from it, from that decision?
Well, he stopped living a lie, I guess, would be the main. Like, he stopped having, like, I can only imagine how difficult it would be if you no longer believed in God, or you had significant doubts about God existing, and then you were called to someone's, bedside as they were dying, and you had to tell them you were praying for them, or you had to speak these words that you didn't believe to be true. Like, you want to talk about not being free, being chained and having to look people in the eye and say something that deep down you have serious doubts about would be, to me, an extreme form of torture.
Right. It's when you talk about this story that we tell ourselves, so this identity, reminds me again of, there's one of my favorite posts from you many years ago. I think it's called the narrative fallacy, right? And basically you explain that it's very tempting to tell this story to ourselves where, I overcame so much, this is what brought me here, so of course I'm destined to this, to keep going this path or to live this success or whatever. And it kind of steers away from what we really need to be thinking, which is, be humble, keep working hard, stay in the moment. There's no, Hollywood story for you. You're not special. Let's all, keep doing what we have to do. And that brings a certain freedom, because it means you're not tied to the past. You're not tied to that.
Yeah, so it's funny. That's actually what I'd like my next book to be about, and something I've been thinking a lot about. It's especially tempting for young people, especially I would say young men. Like, the tools have never been easier to publicly tell and posture around certain stories, right? Like, what you put on Facebook or what you put on Twitter or what you put on Instagram can color and shape the perception of your life a certain way publicly that then is reflected back to you and you start to believe. Like, you can call yourself the CEO of a company that you formed yesterday, right? But are you really a CEO? Or you can call yourself an entrepreneur or an angel investor, or you can put all these labels on yourself that you then sort of feel like you have to live up to, rather than like you feel that you have to continue to pose at rather than earn with actual actions. And so I think that's a huge part of it. But I agree. I think it's much freeing not to have that. There's a quote from Montaigne about a great destiny being a great form of slavery. Or there's a line from David Foster Wallace where he's saying, like, you'll worry a lot less about what people think of you when you realize how seldom they actually think of you. And so, like, because you think that you have Twitter followers or Facebook fans, you can wrongly give yourself the impression that people are watching and that people care about what you say rather than what you do. And I think that's the fundamental shift that I see, that I try to resist in my own life, that I think is really important.
Yeah. Let me actually. There's one case where I agree with you. In 99% of the cases, but there's one case where I think people will actually not care. I wouldn't use the word care, but they will definitely pay attention. Which is and it's not with your Facebook or Twitter followers, but with people that are closer to you. There's a point where what you do makes it brings a conflict to what they do, and now we have a problem. Now they're gonna bite and they're gonna attack, right?
No, there's no question. Like, when you make certain decisions in your life that challenge the identity of other people, like if you decide not to go to college, that is you are making a judgment about college that people who are sensitive or insecure about college are going to feel like implies something about them. Or if you decide not to pursue a traditional career, or you decide not to buy a house, if you decide to not do the things that your parents or your peers do, many people will interpret that as some sort of implicit threat, either to their identity or to the decisions that they made. It's like, hey, I bought in. Like, if you're not buying in, you're challenging like what I've vested or what I've spent. And so that's definitely something that is particularly overwhelming and stressful when you're 19, 20, 21, because you don't have, it's rare that you have the sort of security and sense of self that you can go like, look, I'm not going to college because it's the right decision for me. That's going to piss some people off. And that's totally fine, but it shouldn't change or influence what I'm doing.
Right. And interesting, you say it's hard for when you're 19. I think the problem is that it gets even harder later. The more you wait, the harder it gets. Like the example of the minister, I find people, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, that they're feeling this I'm living a lie. This is not this is not what I want to do. This is not who I am. And by that time, you've kind of bought in, but secretly you never did. There's this the sacrifice. What you're giving up, I guess, is a lot more.
Sure, like if you have a wife or a husband, or you have kids, or you have a house, or you've gotten accustomed to driving certain cars, and you tell yourself that you drive that car because you deserve to drive that car, and that car says something about you, it makes it a lot harder to say, look, I got to sell the Range Rover because I want to start a company and I need like capital, or it makes things that are already hard a lot harder.
Right. That I always say that when I tell my story so far. I tell people that in general I feel very lucky. I feel very blessed about many things that have happened to me. And the only thing I say that I'm proud of is that very specifically two times in my life, I had a very comfortable, clear, successful, one could say, present, and I consciously destroyed it completely because I was, too stagnant and too. I felt I needed a new challenge, and I need to keep moving forward. So that sometimes you can get lucky, and I got lucky in where that change was pushed onto me by life. But sometimes, thank God that I also made the conscious decision a couple of times. So I bring this up because we're talking about this sort of like changing who we are and the way we do things. And you wrote there's a post that you wrote, which is how dropping out of college can save your life, right? So I thought it would be interesting for you to talk about all the Ryans you've killed. You know, I know a couple of Carlos I've killed, but I think you make a good point there.
Yeah, it's funny. I was reading a book recently that I really liked. It's called The Apprentice of Duddy Kravitz. It's like a book about a young Jewish man in Montreal in like the 40s. But it had an even better line. He says like, a boy can be many people. A man can only be one. And so I think there's this idea that as you like, there's all these different parts of you, and you can indulge different parts of that during your life. You can do this for a while, you can do that for a while, you can do this for a while. Especially now, like it's much easier and cheaper. Like, oh, I'm going to start a company, then I'm going to sell it, then I'm going to work for a company, then I'm going to be a consultant. There's that freedom. But like for me in my life, like I've done certain things and I've gotten I've gotten good. I've gotten financially successful with them. I've achieved some status in those fields. You know, I was an entertainment executive. I was a student. I was an entertainment executive. I was a marketing executive. I was a writer. I had my own company. You know, I've done those things, and you know, you can decide at any point that you're not going to pursue anything else. Like, this is who I'm going to be forever. And that doesn't really do it for me. So I like, you know, I liked college, but I had this opportunity to do something else, and I had to sort of kill that part of me. And like, there's some part of me that would like to go back to it, but I know that I can't because it's dead. It's over. And so, you know, I urge people.
When you say kill, I think it's important that the word implies a certain loss, and I think that's what it actually feels like. There's a certain loss. There's a grieving.
Yeah, totally. Like a good example is there's this football player in the U.S. Like NFL, so American football, who he just decided that he didn't. This happened this year. He played for the Denver Broncos, who are in the Super Bowl this year, and he just decided that he didn't love football anymore, and so he quit. Like he quit. He gave up $1 million to kill that part. Like he not only killed that part, the football player. His name is John Moffat, but he not only killed like the football player version of himself, but he lit $1 million on fire. Like he just said, like, I don't want this $1 million. It's more important to me to be what I want to be than to show up every day to a job that I don't like, that could hurt me, that I don't care about. And so I'm just not going to do it anymore. And that, I think that's incomprehensible to a lot of people. And then there's other people, like I relate to that instantly. I totally get what he's thinking. And, you know, a way to maybe make that more accessible was like, you know, people assume that they're going to live forever, or that their life is in their control. So they'll go like, look, I don't want to do football anymore, but I'm going to do it for 2 more years, because then when I'm done, I'll have this $1 million, and then I can do whatever I want. But what if you get in a car accident in 18 months? You know, like you don't. So I think, you know, you've got to decide or accept your understanding of how much control you have over your life. And there's some things we do control, which is whether we're going to continue doing something we don't want to do or not right now, or there's the idea that, you know, like the future is going to unfold exactly how you think it is, and I'm not sure that's totally true.
Right. Is it so? What were your different stances, different moments when you kind of like face a decision? How often have you faced this decision? I think that's also important.
Well, I mean, I dropped out of college. I worked in Hollywood, and I sort of realized that wasn't for me. Like, you know, I could have kept doing that. I could have made a lot of money. I didn't like how it was making me. I didn't like the people I was working with. So I left that. I joined American Apparel, and I was sort of doing this, you know, marketing executive thing, and you know, that was going great. And I could have kept doing that. I could have, you know, worked higher up in the company. I could have left and worked at a bigger company. I could have started my own company, but I sort of put that behind to become a writer. From the writing, I sort of started my own marketing company. So I decided I wasn't like, I'd always wanted to be a writer, and that's what I thought I would do. And then I realized like being a writer wasn't enough. It wasn't I wasn't just going to write books about stuff. So I thought, you know, could I do both at the same time? So I kind of did both. And then I don't know where I am now, but I'm sure there's going to be more stuff in the future that I'm going to decide, look, I don't want to write anymore, or I don't want to do any sort of client work anymore. I just like I don't. My story is not that important. The point is, you know, is what you're doing making you happy? Is it what you want to continue doing? And if the answer to that is no, then maybe it's time for a clean break and you know, an attempt at doing something else. You can, you know, that's what I would ask people to think about.
Right, right. There's a quote that you sentence that you put in your post, which is, "We don't believe in sunk costs."
Right.
What does that mean? Like, how can you explain that?
Well, sunk costs are an interesting economic concept, which is like, okay, if you buy a movie ticket and you sit in the movie and you decide you don't like the movie anymore, a lot of
20 minutes in, right?
Yeah, they'll finish the movie because they paid for it.
Right.
But also, you can leave the movie and you still paid for it, and you can do something you actually like.
Right.
Now, of course, that's easier said than done. If you spent 2 years and you paid for 2 years of college, it's hard to say like, I'm going to drop out, I'm going to leave. But I think it's something to ask yourself always when you are thinking about continuing something or doubling down on something that's not working for you. Ask yourself, like, is this because of money? And if it's because of money, ask yourself, like, you know, could you just get more money in the future doing other things? You know, because like Tim Ferriss talks about this, time is the only non-renewable resource. So don't spend future time to recover already spent money. That's like the dumbest investment decision that you can make.
It's funny, I had the other quote that I picked two quotes from that post, and the other one is, space is recoverable, the status of a college degree, the income from a job, that's all recoverable, but time is not. That's in your post.
That's interesting. From Napoleon. He says, space I can recover, time never. There's these moments in time that you have, not just like, hey, you're never going to have this second again, but there's opportunities that you have in your life. And so if that means quitting a job where you're making $200,000 a year to take advantage of some opportunity you're never going to get again, it might be worth it because there's lots of jobs where you can make $200,000 a year. And I know that sounds crazy and like the opposite of what your parents would want you to think, but it's true. There's always ways to earn more money. There's not ways to go back in time or recreate alignments of circumstance. And that's not to say that you should take advantage of every crazy opportunity, because a lot of sometimes, you know, sometimes it's not right. Sometimes you're tired. I totally get it. I'm just saying, you know, never do something because you already invested in it. And never do something your heart's not in because you already decided on it or you already spent money on it. That's a very foolish decision.
Yes. I remember one time, I wrote a post a long time ago, which is why it's easier for us to stop seeing movies than to stop reading a book.
Right.
Because a book, it costs more. It's more expensive in time. So once we start, it's like, we're going to finish it. And we suffer through the whole book, which we hate, just because we started, right? But yeah, it's definitely something that's harder. And there's let me kind of switch to another thing. Yeah. You have in your wall, you framed this excerpt from Tyler Cowen's book, Average is Over, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's right here. It's right here.
Yeah, yeah. What is it that it's about scarcity, right? It's about what is scarce nowadays. And I thought this was a very important concept because it implies for everyone, whatever people are thinking that they have to be doing now, well, maybe that's not what you should be doing now, because maybe what you're doing, it's not scarce anymore. So this is another mental model that we need to change. But it seemed so important to you that I thought it would be interesting to talk about it.
Yeah, it's funny. The quote I have under it is a quote from Seneca that says, "Some lack the fickleness to live as they wish and just live as they have begun," which I think is the sunk cost fallacy sort of embodied. It's like, just because you started something doesn't mean that you can't change your mind. Right. But the Tyler Cowen quote, he's talking about, you know, what's not scarce is unskilled labor and cash. Like because of the problems with the economic system that we've had, there's more money looking to be deployed in cash generating ways than ever before. So just think about it this way. A startup used to cost like $1 million to fund. Now it costs $10,000. Right. So there's 990,000 more dollars for every startup than is necessary. So it's not if you want to invest in the next Facebook, it's not about whether you have the money. It's whether they want your money. And so you have to bring certain things to the table. And I think that's a good analogy for the rest of for the rest of life. The things that are scarce is quality land and natural resources. He says intellectual property or good ideas about what should be done. So again, it's not cash that's scarce. It's really good ideas that are scarce. And then quality labor with unique skills. So it's if you can do something that people want and need, if you have ideas that people haven't thought of before and want or need, or you have non-renewable things that people want and need, like oil or valuable land or locations. Those are the things that are increasingly scarce. And so I would ask yourself, if you're deciding what college to go to, or you're deciding whether you're going to go to grad school, or you're deciding what you want to do with your life, or whatever, are you doubling down on things that? Are you doubling down or investing in things that people don't actually need? Like, are you saving up money? Well, that's not really what. Are you saving up money to become an angel investor or something? Well, that's not really super rare. Or are you getting more education that's not practical? Like, that doesn't do anything either. So it's what forms of value do you bring to people, institutions, opportunities, etc. And if you can't answer that question, then I think you probably need to go back to the drawing board a little bit.
Right. One thing that it's interesting, you say that ideas are Tyler Cowen says ideas are valuable. How does that connect with this thing that we hear over and over about ideas worth cheap and they're everywhere?
Sure. I guess that it's a good point because like the world does have a lot of people who talk about stuff, but I guess he probably means good ideas that can actually be executed on.
Executable ideas and
sure.
Basically sort of more not in such a raw state. Everyone has this quick thought they had.
Right. No one needs like another crappy app idea. But if you have something that's truly powerful and changing and world changing in some way, there's an infinite demand for those things.
Right. So what models like? What do you see that it's preventing people now? If you think of most young people, or maybe not so young, but just people in general that are in the rat race, what is it that may prevent them from understanding this new scarcity
Well, so like what he's talking about in that breakdown is this sort of idea of a hyper meritocracy, right? So it used to be like average, like the book is called Average is Over, and I think that's a good way of putting it. It used to be like, hey, if you had pretty good ideas or you had decent labor or you had like a little bit of money, those are all valuable things. But no, it's those things in extremes that are valuable. So maybe him saying, quality labor or good ideas, what he really means is amazing ideas or high quality labor, like super high quality labor. So I think what people do is they end up sort of taking these safe paths or these sort of average paths, and then they wonder why they get left out of things. Like it's like, hey, I went 4 years to a state school and now no one will hire me. And it's like, yeah, you and millions of other people did that. So why would they hire you? Like, meanwhile, someone else went to an elite university, or they didn't go to university, but they taught themselves certain skills. Those are the people that the spoils will go to, not the sort of middle of the pack people. So I guess what I would encourage people to think about is those extremes and where do you fit on that spectrum. And if you're not on the extreme, sort of hyper valuable end of any spectrum, but you're in the middle of a lot of them, that's probably a problem.
Got it. Got it. No, I agree with that, and definitely the approach that I try to push even to my brothers. I mean, it's definitely what you gotta don't do what everybody else is doing.
Right.
Let me kind of start wrapping it up. There's this
Yeah.
another good post of yours, which is advice for a young man hoping to go somewhere.
Sure.
So let me go over the bullet points quickly, and then maybe I'll stop on a couple of them so you can explain what you mean, because I thought it was really really good. So some of your advice for, again, a young person that wants to go somewhere, whatever that is, right?
Right.
You say calm down.
Right.
You say assess the terrain. So what do you mean by assess the terrain?
It's really easy because you read a book about something or you had a lecture about it in college to think that you know everything about some topic when of course you have no idea what the fuck you're talking about.
Right.
And you should sit there and just observe and learn, and it takes time to figure stuff out. And then I think the other part of it is, and this goes to sort of Robert Greene's theories and strategies, you have to understand the personal element. You've got to understand it's not just whether you're right or wrong or you have the best ideas. It's about the political landscape that you're trying to execute them in. It's about the influencers and the people and the decision makers and whether or not you can get them on board. So I think a lot of young people just dive into stuff thinking that the quality of their ideas is what will carry them, but it's also, the time and the place at which they attempt to put them out.
Yeah, I agree. It was definitely my big mistake and my first big executive job when I was 20. I thought, oh, I'm so smart,
right?
I'm so great, and I completely ignored the politics, and it completely prevented me from learning really how
right.
And then I only had 2 jobs in my life, and that the second one, which was way later, I remember that, and it just changed everything. Being friendly. I guess there's one here that you say is another one of your advice is prove that you're capable, but also that you're sane. Be
right.
normal enough. Don't
right.
Right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people they think that it's all about whether their ideas are good, and they don't take care of themselves in terms of their mental health or their personality, or they're not well adjusted, and then they wonder why they can't handle the stress or stuff blows up in their face. That matters. People matter. The medium is the message. If you're a crazy person that nobody trusts, it doesn't matter how good your ideas are.
Right. Okay, so I'll keep going. It's another one is always say less than necessary. I think that explains itself. Stay on the radar. What do you mean by that?
I think people think that sort of being an up-and-comer is this official thing that happens. It's oh, hey, I'm going to mentor you, you're my mentee or whatever. Or hey, you did this thing and everyone knows about it, now you're set for life. No, it's a process, and it's a steady thing that you've got to work on all the time. So it's if you build a connection with someone, it's not a one-and-done thing. It's something that you've got to develop over time by continuing to prove yourself and continuing to do a good job.
Right. You can't rely on. And I've met that's interesting. I've met so many young people now that they did something great at some point, and they trust they can ride that train for the next 10 years, and people forget really quickly about your accomplishments, and you need to keep proving yourself. Most of all, then you say don't be too good at being an assistant, which I love that.
Right.
Most people on the internet are losers and outsiders. True. If you're working all the time, you're doing something wrong. That's also true. Steer clear of charlatans, lifers, and the toxic. Skip most of the social activities the job requires. This is interesting. This is, I think you were referring to all these networking events and all these things that people that is just pretends work. Really, it doesn't add anything, and you can you could be doing real work instead.
Right. No, calling it pretend work is a good way of putting it. Find out the things that most of the people think you have to do, but actually don't matter.
Right.
And then just don't do those things.
Right.
So it's if you're working all the time, it's probably because you're doing a lot of stuff that you don't actually have to do.
Right.
So I would rather work 8 hours, but actually work for 8 hours than work for 10 hours and have 3 or 4 hours of fucking waste in there of like, oh, everyone does this big meandering lunch every day, or I say yes to every phone call request that comes my way. I sort of try to skip the optional activities and focus on what I'm actually there to do.
Right.
And if you're someone who delivers results, you get a pass on that stuff.
Right, right. It's true. Then ask yourself, am I saying this because I want to prove how smart I am, or because it needs to be said? I think this relates to what you were saying before about you have all these ideas that you saw in books or
right.
classes or whatever. That means nothing. Forget credit. This was another one that was hard for me to learn in the beginning. In the beginning, you want to deserve. You feel you deserve
right.
things, right? And
right.
That may it's again another part of ignoring politics. I think you don't want to clash with the people that are you're working for, or it's better for them to take it, right?
Right.
Save your money, write your own rules. What do you mean by this?
I think it kind of goes back to the other part, which is find out what's optional, what rules really matter, what triggers and important boundaries there actually are, and follow those. But just because you're supposed to do a thing a certain way doesn't mean that that's the best way to do it. And if you can question those things, that's where you find shortcuts, and that's how you pull ahead of people.
Right, right. Educate yourself.
Yep.
Make it happen. Definitely, this is one of the also most important ones. I see a lot of problems with this with people that come from a very structured background. This is one of the problems with college, the touristification of education, which I call. What Taleb talks about this. When all your development has happened in this sort of bubble with all these fake rules and fake results and fake everything, and all this cushions for
right.
failure. Once you have to go and do real things in the real world, you have no idea how to do it, and you want all this
right.
clarity again, and the clarity is just never going to be there. So
right.
learning to just make it happen with that lack of clarity, I think it's one of the definitely most important things that a young person can learn to be valuable, right? To be indispensable.
Totally.
Then have an exit strategy. This one's just interesting. Maybe you can explain about that one.
Yeah, it's look, what are you actually doing this for? Like a lot of people, it's like, oh, I'm gonna get this entry-level job, and then they don't think any further than that. They don't know what they're doing next. They don't know where this fits into that. So they end up just doing stuff. And I think every decision that you make should be part of some other decision. Like you're doing this because of this, and then after that you're going to do this. It should be part of a strategy. Otherwise, you're just drifting. And you're not going to know how to face other decisions. So it's like, if you're working this entry-level job because you are planning to do this other thing, if you start getting offers, if you start getting promotions, you're not going to know whether you should accept them or not. Or you're going to know whether you should accept them or not because you're doing it for a specific reason. You don't want to wake up one day and realize like, oh shit, I bought a house because I could afford it right now, but really I don't want to do this job any longer, but I just bought a house, so now I can't move.
So it's part of what we were talking before, right? It becomes a sunk cost, it's part of your identity, it's harder to change. So having that sort of bigger plan, which doesn't mean you have to be rigid about it, you don't have to stick to it.
But know more or less where you're going.
Right, exactly. And then adapt as new information comes in. Then don't expect anyone else to understand. Definitely, I see a lot of, one of the biggest problems that I see with people nowadays is that they feel misunderstood and they feel they should be understood. And what I tell them is, listen, if you keep moving forward, you're gonna find the people that understand you, but don't expect people that are part of this past thing that you're trying to leave behind to understand the future stuff you're trying to build, because you're asking them something that's unrealistic. So it's just part of the obstacle, the struggle that we have to tolerate while we move forward, right?
Sure.
Keep your plans to yourself, because I read somewhere that when it's less likely to happen when you do something. When you tell people, you're kind of feeling this gratification just by telling people, as if you had done something when you actually didn't.
Right.
Right. and then the last two, relax, and you're not special.
Right.
So yeah, this was I think a very good list for a very good set of advice. So Ryan, let me to thank you, and maybe to wrap up, what could be some sort of closing, encouraging, but I know you're like me, encouraging but realistic advice to people that are because believe me, in Exosphere, we hear a lot of people all over the world telling us, I want to do something, but I don't know what. No one knows, no one understands what I want to do. I can't find help. I don't have a set of ideas, whatever. Like these people that are stuck, where I think both of us have been at some point.
Sure.
What could be what would be your last words for them?
Well, yeah. Well, I guess my first thing would be like, don't think that there's some like single piece of advice that's going to help you, because there isn't. If you're looking for that, you're never going to find it. But I would think about, what is it that you're really trying to do here? Like, what is it? What are the things that are truly important to you? And is what you're doing right now getting you any closer to doing that thing? Like, or are you doing it for other reasons that, are not actually important to you? So if you can really be constantly checking where it is that you intend to go against what you're doing right now and asking, is this getting me any closer to doing that? You're going to be less likely to find yourself one day very, very far from where you intended to go.
Right. Perfect. Well, Ryan, thanks a lot, man, for your time here. It was very fun. I gotta do it again soon. I really enjoy every time we talk, because I really respect your ideas, and I think have the dose of realism that it's important in this sort of big bubble of feel good about yourself stuff that it's a bit toxic sometimes. So I think I really appreciate this time with us.
Of course, thanks for having me.